Hi, Ashley. It's great to have you with us on the podcast today.
Hi, Melita. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
You are very welcome. So, I'm really excited to speak to you today because you are a book coach and you help people really write their book. And I've been um, reading through some of your reviews, and it's like, wow, they get their books written like really fast, which is great because when you have an idea, particularly if you're an entrepreneur and you want to write your book, you kind of just want to get it done. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about your advice on how a book could fit into your business and how people can get started with that. But first, I'd love to know, how did you get started as a book coach?
Yeah, so it was a very organic process. Really, the methodology I use now was born out of my own frustration of wanting a strategy to actually finish my first book. But there's a lot of stuff out there on the craft of writing, like how to be a better writer overall and develop your skill. Not so much on a strategy to go from end to end, to go from idea to finished product. So I really didn't see that out there. So I kind of built it from scratch. I went and looked at what other people were doing, what seemed to make them successful, and I built my own strategy to kind of help me get my first book done and to get it published and to get it selling. So yeah, it's been very organic, and from that journey, I found myself working with a lot of writers, a lot of aspiring first-time authors, mainly that kind of had the same question I did. Well, how do I go from beginning to end? Where do I start? And how do I make sure that what I write is actually good, of quality, it represents me well? So yeah, it was a very organic process. And from there, I thought, maybe I should become a book coach. So that's kind of how I got into it. Yeah.
Great. And when you started, did you have any expectations of where that journey was going to take you? And how did the reality match up to those if you did?
Yeah, it's funny. I definitely had expectations. I definitely wanted to serve a lot of people. But I didn't know the how. I didn't know what came between the starting and actually having a client base. It was a very kind of mind-boggling process. So I would say, although I have an entrepreneurial spirit, I'll try different things. I'm definitely gung ho to kind of put myself out there. I didn't necessarily have the steps in place to know what to do and when. For example, when do I need a sales funnel? Do I need a sales funnel? Should I invest in Facebook ads or, Google ads or any of that kind of thing? Do I need a YouTube channel? It was all very kind of confusing at the beginning. But for me, my approach was like, let's go back to basics of what I'm good at and just start there by serving one person first. So I kind of eliminated a lot of the noise early on and just said, let me serve one person and start from that point. So, and in doing that, it kind of eventually became clearer. The fog cleared, you can say, and it became more apparent what the next steps were. But yeah, it's the expectations and reality. It's like, it's a really difficult journey for sure to start out and to be in it in what you perceive is, um, I would say, an isolated experience. It can be very isolating to start on your own and think that, it's just you. You're the only one going through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear that all the time. Oh, I'm probably the only one that experiences this. And you're like, no, everyone has the same experience. But I love
Yeah.
that you had this idea, you had this passion, you had the vision, but you had no idea what to do. But that didn't stop you. You did it anyway. And you were so right. So starting your own business, it's so chicken and egg. It's kind of like, well, what comes first? Do I do this or do I do that? And if you just go to YouTube and there's so much great advice on there, but trying to filter out which is good advice and which is the advice for you right now and which is the advice
Yes.
that we should apply in 6 months from now is really, you just don't know. So I love that you took it back to basics, because in my view that's absolutely the right thing to do. My background's in marketing, communications and leadership, and I think people jump into their marketing too soon. They start telling us, oh, I've got this amazing product, I'm going to invest in Facebook ads, but they don't actually have a message or a clear offer or a niche or any of these things yet. But if you just go out and work with that first client, you'll figure that
Yes.
out. They will tell you, hey, I love this about you. And this is actually what you're offering me. And this is what I value. And you can say, great. and you can use that to get your next client and then build from there. So I love that approach that you broke it down, focused in on what you're good at, gave amazing service to one client, and then built from there. And I think that's just such a wonderful way to develop your own framework and foundation.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's very organic, as I said, and I think everybody can do this. Everybody um, can start with just serving one person and helping them get a result or outcome that they desire, that they need, and from there, like take the next step, serve a second person, right? And as you say, it's a great way to go back to basics and kind of begin and actually get your feet wet a little bit.
Yeah. So how did it feel when you had that first client?
Oh my gosh, I celebrated. I was just ecstatic. It feels really good to use your expertise, as I'm sure the listeners know. It feels really good to use your expertise to help someone.
Mhm.
It's just so rewarding. Um, and it's why we do what we do, because we have gifts. All of us have unique gifts. And when we get really clear on what those gifts are and how we're special and different, even from someone else that's in our same niche or serving the same ideal clients, right? We're still able to serve in a different way because we're all uniquely ourselves and we come at it with our own perspective and experience. So I think, for everyone listening, it's really identifying what your unique perspective is that you can bring to people in your coaching, in your business, in your services. So yeah, it's a wonderful experience because you have the opportunity to get even more clear and more defined in how you can help people, which is wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you take those first steps, you have an idea that you want to help people, that you have something different to bring, but it's not always clear what that is until you start working with people. And then we tend to start think small to start with, which is great. You start with one client, one service with what you know, but suddenly, bit by bit, you start your kind of realm of what's possible starts to grow. And you're like, oh, I can do more than I thought. Well, maybe I could do this. And then you try it and it works or doesn't work. And you start to grow. And it's just the most amazing experience to discover what you're really here for. I think it's just a magical experience.
I agree. I agree completely. Yes.
So when you got your business started, was it a book that kickstarted your business, or did that come before or later?
Yeah, I would say definitely books have always been something that turned the wheels for me and, kickstarted different aspects of my life. So the book definitely helped me. It wasn't the be all and end all, but for me, going back to what I'm good at and what my gifts are, writing and authorship definitely, fall into that category. So being able to share my knowledge and expertise in a book was a great way to kind of nail down and go, okay, this is how I'm going to help people. And I can actually give them all of what I know in a book, and it can help them take the next leap for their book that they want to write. So when I created the Writer Success Code, it was really with that aim is like, let's just give people the basics and help them get started. And then in 7 days, plan their book. So yeah, I mean, it was a very essential tool for my business to get started. But there's a lot of other things you need. It's really just kind of lining them up and making sure that you have all of those things when you begin. But for me, yeah, the book was a good first step to take for sure.
Yeah, and a very natural one for a book coach, of course.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if there's people out there and they've been thinking, maybe a book could help my business, but they're not quite sure if they are a good enough writer or if they had a good enough idea, do you have any advice of where they could start with that?
Absolutely. So I think, we've been talking about, the unique gifts we have as entrepreneurs. So what I always recommend for my clients is to start with your authority story. What is the story that you have? And we all have one. We all have one of these stories that is really like an origin story. What brought you to where you are today? And why do you feel called to do the thing that you're doing now? What makes you the person that you are? So I really encourage people to go back and free write on this idea, to bring out their authority story, kind of get it down on paper so they can reflect back to themselves what they're good at, what they've been through. The challenges that they've faced and overcome that allow them to grow and be the strong, independent, creative, smart person that they are today. So it really is a good reflective exercise, but it also is really, really important to have done that when you come to write a book, because as we know, books are useful in building credibility and authority. So if you understand what makes you an authority, you can start to weave that into the fabric of your book and then share that with your readers. So it's a really important way to begin the process and at least get something down on paper that you can look back at and see, oh yeah, I've done some stuff. I've accomplished some stuff. I can help some people with my story. And it's really, really empowering. I love to do this exercise with my authors. You can just take 30 minutes and sit down, free write at your computer and see what comes out. You'd be surprised. There's always a gem or two that emerges in that process. So I love people to do the free write. It's a great way to begin.
Mm. I remember when I used to work in corporate and I was a corporate writer at that stage, and very often I had to interview people from across the organization for the various magazines and intranets and things. And so
Mhm.
often people are like, well, why do you want to speak to me? I'm not interesting. And they were like the head of a department and they had amazing knowledge. And as soon as I started speaking with them, it was evident that they had so many interesting stories. Is there any common blocks that you see people having when they kind of sit down, start to free write, but they hold themselves back because they don't think they're interesting, or they don't have any unique perspectives? Is that do you experience that at all? And if so, is there anything you've discovered that helps people kind of start breaking down those barriers?
Yeah, that's such a great question. There's always a resistance to writing the story for the first time. You bring up some of the thoughts, right? It's well, what do I have to say that's different? Or lots of people have done that. Or, I don't think people really are interested in hearing that part of my life. And it's really, really amazing to see what happens when you kind of just shift all those thoughts over here and go, okay, well, what if I just wrote it anyway? What if I just sat down and told my story in spite of all those thoughts, right? And that resistance that comes up. It's a very natural resistance. It always is there in some shape or form. But the best way to get over it is to put your storyteller hat on. And I always say, like, imagine you're sitting at like a campfire or a dinner table and there's candles, some kind of lovely, warm environment where you would feel comfortable telling your story to a close group of friends or colleagues or family members. And just imagine, how would you start your story? Where would you begin? And how would you express what you've been through? And what would that look like to just have that conversation? So when you break down some of those barriers, it gets easier to put your storyteller hat on and just share what you know, what you've been through, where you started, and how you got to where you are today.
And I think once you start with that, I know with my book, when I started just note down some of the stories I could bring out in the book, and I thought maybe I'd come across one or two, and there was like hundreds. I was like, gosh, I'm gonna have to write a whole series. When in fact I will be writing a whole series. um,
Yeah.
because I was like, oh, but I want to cover everything. But the book, when I started mapping it out, it was going to be like War and Peace. I was like, no, I'm going to do a series of mini books and do it that way instead. So I think once you get
Yes.
started, as you said, you can really surprise yourself.
Yes, it's so true. It's so true. There's a lot of hidden gems that come through in that process. And then, you get an opportunity to select what are the stories that really mean something to you that you want to tell your readers, you want to share with your audience, and then picking and choosing those to be a part of your book.
Yeah. And what if you're someone who can't write?
That's a great question. I mean, it's funny because I would say that every expert I've worked with and have talked to, they've all been very skilled writers. They know how to do the basics. It's really more of a mindset thing than a skill thing, if you know what I mean. It's really about getting the the thoughts cleared out, the hesitations, the resistance cleared out, and really kind of stepping into a place of confidence, feeling confident in who they are and what they've done. Most experts, entrepreneurs, business owners, consultants, they've done some writing of some kind, whether it's just an email to their fans or their followers or their clients, whether it's a blog post, they've done something expressively. So it's really not that they don't know how to write. It's more that they feel inhibited because of the thoughts that they're having, the mindset challenges they're facing. So if we can shift those out of the way, then I think the writing starts to flow. Usually we see the writing just kind of come out of them. And the intuitive nature of writing and storytelling is something I think all people can really do. It's just a matter of getting into that zone
Yeah.
and feeling comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that advice. And as you say, we've all grown up around stories. We all watch films and Netflix, and so we've all had an induction in what a good story sounds like. So once you get started, it's probably all comes flooding in.
Absolutely. I firmly believe that you touch on a good point, which is like we all intuitively know what a good story is. And many times it's like, well, let's just get out of our own way so we can tell the stories we want to tell. But I absolutely believe that everybody has a story within them, an authority story, especially that they can put down in a book. It really is just more of a mindset challenge. But yeah, most people can write. Most people are capable storytellers. It's just getting them out of their own way.
Yeah, and it's like with business, really.
Exactly like the business. Exactly like the business.
And I
Yes.
guess this similar with business. I think you don't, I mean, there's no one perfect way to run a business, but I believe that once you have a framework of what you need to do and when, as you said, that's the big question, which is what I provide people is with this framework on exactly how to build your business, but then it's done in such a way that you can then adapt that to your situation. There's no kind of this is the one way to build a business. You have that system and the framework that you can then pick up and use and apply to your own business. Do you see that the same thing happening with a book, that once you have a sort of a framework to use to start structuring your story, then the rest kind of falls into place?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's really, as you say, it's very similar to business. When we start off on a new venture or something unknown, we kind of always ask the same question, which is where do I begin? And then what do I do after that? And then what do I do after I solve that problem? So having that kind of step plan or framework or strategy is so important for a book, especially for a first time author. If you've written books before, then you kind of have a sense of how it goes. But if it's your first book and you're trying to get it out of you, just like if it's your first business you're starting, you really do need a game plan. You need something to guide you through that experience, because you can really shorten the time frame when you have a strategy, and it prevents a lot of the missteps and a lot of the trial and error that you can encounter when you're doing something new. So it's like I always say, don't reinvent the wheel. Go to somebody who's done it and had success and follow what they've done. Of course, adapt it for your own situation as you need to. But yeah, have a strategy, have a game plan to take you from where you are to where you want to go, whether that's in business or whether it's the act of starting a new book project and actually getting over the finish line, getting it published. Yeah, there's follow through there. So always a strategy. I
Yeah.
completely agree.
Yeah, I think willpower and intention takes us so far, but where that kind of fades and lets us down, then the strategy and the system takes over and then helps us get to that finish line, because it's it's all what good, it's all well and good starting things, but if you don't finish them, then they're kind of meaningless.
Yes, yes, absolutely. There's a saying that we have in a coaching group that I'm a part of for business, which is like you can create the stuff, but at some point you have to get out onto the court. You have to talk to your network. You have to, have conversations. You have to, enroll clients into your business. Like there's getting out onto the court. And I think what really holds back so many writers and entrepreneurs is kind of staying in that comfort zone and not getting out there, not having those conversations, and even asking for help when things are tough. That becomes a blocker for sure.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up. I think asking for help is one of the key things. I mean, none of us know everything, even when we've been in business for many years. They'll have all sorts of questions, and you kind of build your business and then you scale it, and then you have to kind of like start all over again, because now you have to be a leader of a team, and you have to cope with more clients and better systems and different everything. It's like, oh. That's kind of
Yeah.
what makes it fun, that there is no end point necessarily. It's all this learning process that you keep going through.
Yes, 100%.
So coming back to the idea of writing a book for your business, how do you see that working? How can a book really help people to uh, get further in their business?
Yeah, so the main piece is definitely credibility and authority. It's so important to kind of establish yourself as an expert in your space. So that's where a book can be really, really helpful. So I think there's a lot of different tactics you could use to leverage slash monetize the book. But for people in the entrepreneurial space, there's one big thing that I would say, and that I want, your audience and listeners to be mindful of when they go to write a book and they have the book and they publish the book. It's really to not focus on book sales. Take the focus away from individual book sales and instead think about leveraging that book instead of selling the book. So, what do I mean by leveraging the book? I mean, well, doing what I did, giving away as many copies as you can to as many people as you can that are in your ideal client pool, and just give them the value of your book. And it may seem really counterintuitive because you think, well, I've spent so long writing it and I've spent so much time and effort and money publishing it. And how can I not immediately recoup that investment with book sales? But the difference is, like, when you focus on the individual book sales, you really kind of cut yourself short from the opportunity of leveraging your book. Because when you can impact at scale and say give away 5,000 copies, many of those readers, you're going to have people come back to you and want the next thing that you offer, whether that's coaching or consulting or a digital program or a workshop. They're going to, if they got value from that book, they're going to want more from you. So the best thing you can do is leverage that book in every avenue you can, in interviews like this one, on your website, as a lead magnet, in your email signatures, everywhere you talk and present and share. That book should be front and center, and just give it away, because more than a business card, it really is a calling card, and it lets people know who you are and what you stand for really, really quickly. So that's really what I believe is, if we can focus on leveraging the book and not selling the book, you're going to recoup your investment, you're going to impact more people, and you're going to get your name out there more than you could if you just focus on individual sales.
I love that perspective. And yeah, it's really interesting to see how putting your thoughts down and your story down in a book is really going to attract the right people to you, because you've been more open than you could be in a webinar or a free checklist that you might give out. So, and of
Yes.
course, being someone that can sit down and create that and finish it and get it out there, of course, already gives you a certain level amount of credibility and kudos and respect as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I'll often hear, well, the book is a really expensive business card. It really took me a long time to put this together and publish it. So people hesitate to give it away for free. But one important thing to remember is, like, there's very little information you can get from somebody in a business card, on a business card. In a book, it's very different, and it has the ability to persuade through the power of storytelling in a way that other tools don't. You mentioned checklists and other lead magnets. They don't have the ability to persuade in a way that a book does because of its narrative quality. So, and the other thing is, like, people don't throw away books, as far as I know, and most people keep a book, and eventually, if they're interested, they'll read it. if they're interested, they'll open it, they'll finish it. And if you've given someone value in your book, that is the best way to invite them into your world and to working with you in some capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just thinking that in my book's all about networking. I mean, there are a billion books on networking already, but I'm still always asked about networking because I think it's one of the most important marketing strategies you can use, because it's free, it's easy, it builds that know, like, and trust factor really fast. But if you feel shy, like, and I grew up labeled a shy girl, then it can feel really, really difficult. So I'm always being asked to speak about that topic and share some advice. I thought, right, I'm just going to put it all in a book. But one thing that I mentioned about networking is one of the most sort of really valuable things you can give people is your time and attention. And in a book, I was just, as you were saying, give these books away. It just made me think, actually, it probably feels like they're getting your special time and attention because you have taken time to give that, to put your thoughts and experiences and stories into a book, and then to give that to someone. As you say, like, books, I think most people really treasure books. They don't throw them away. As you say, it's something different and special. So it probably feels really like a valuable gift to them. Do you think that, does that sound about right to you?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Like it's a very valuable gift, especially if you're speaking into their experience and what they feel that they need, so the reader's kind of like uh well, hopefully, if you've spoken to them in the right way, right? You get a sense of like, this author knows me. They're talking just to me. They hear exactly what's going on in my head. They hear the conversation I'm having with myself. And so, yeah, it can be very, very personal, unlike other, um, unlike other tools we have these days. There's so many different ways of transferring knowledge, but none of them have the, I would say, emotional feeling or persuasive uh, tendencies that a book can have. We can all think of a book we've read that changed our lives. And I think that it's really interesting to consider the way that your book could be life changing for someone else. So I always like to plant that seed is like, yeah, think of a book that changed your life. Now imagine your book does that for someone else. How would that feel? So 100%, I agree with you. Yeah.
So I was going to ask, in business, it's really important to have a clear niche, to really know who your ideal clients are, so you can speak to them and you can really create everything to attract those perfect clients in. Is it the same situation with a book? Do you really need to think about who is that perfect reader, or is it more about your story and just getting it out your way?
It really ideally when you're connecting your book with a business, you want to connect with a very specific ideal reader in the same way you would an ideal client. Because usually the end goal is to connect with them in such a way that one day they become your ideal clients. So you want to think about transforming ideal readers into ideal clients over the trajectory of their reading experience. So I completely agree that if you're a business owner, if you're an entrepreneur, then the book should feel connected to an ideal reader and be positioned for their experience. Not just demographically, not just like, depending on their occupation or their age or their gender, some of those qualities, but really, really zeroing in on their emotional experience of what is drawing to them to the point of actually seeking out your book for help. What's calling them? What do they need? What are they challenged by? What do they fear? What do they hope for? And really getting to the heart of what their emotional experience is that's causing them to seek help and purchase or request your book, right?
Mm. Yeah, I think if you do that free writing exercise to find your authority story, and then you combine that with your ideal clients and connecting with them on the levels you were just talking about, then I guess you kind of have your book written almost.
Yeah, yeah, you really do because it becomes very clear what you need to say and what are the outcomes you're giving to that reader. So you're absolutely right. A few key pieces like that can give immense clarity on what your book is. And then once you're in the zone, it practically can write itself.
Mm, I love that idea.
I do too.
So assuming the listeners, they've taken all of this on board and they've finished their book, what do you do with a book once it's finished? Is there any marketing strategies that are specific to book writers or books in particular?
Yeah. So, the best thing to do is to really start thinking about publishing and where and how you want to be published.
Mhm.
So many entrepreneurs have great success with self-publishing. It's easier now than it ever has been before. And so I would really encourage people to investigate different self-publishing options that are out there. Many coaches like myself offer them. You can even DIY it if you are knowledgeable and you feel like, getting your hands dirty, you can do that. But I think the main thing is to look at your publishing options and figure out what's best for you. So when I advise on publishing, really there's two big factors I like people to think about. One is the amount of control or responsibility you want to have over your book. So if you're going after a publisher, then you're going to give up some control, and that can be a good thing because you're also giving up some responsibility. So they'll typically take over and manage quite a lot of the process. Now, of course, financially, you're paying for that with the royalties and percentages there that you're giving up. On the other hand, if you choose to self-publish, you're retaining a lot of control, but you also have a lot of responsibility because you are your own publisher. So, it's really looking at that as a factor. That's number one. The second big one is to look at the speed to market. So, how important is it that the book gets out there quickly? If it's really, really important and you have to have it out there, say in less than 9 months, certainly self publishing is the way that you want to go. If you are okay with waiting 18, 24 months for the book to come out, then you're okay traditionally publishing because they're going to move a lot slower. Now, there is a third option for people to consider. It's hybrid publishing. It's right there in the middle. They will typically move faster than a traditional publisher, but they have some of the benefits of self-publishing in that you can retain some control and have a little bit more say in the process of your book. So it really is just kind of figuring out which lane is right for you based on the control you want to have and then how quickly you want the book to get to market.
Mm, great. So lots of things to think about. And yeah, I never realized it would take so long to get a traditional book published.
Yes, yes, they can definitely move slow. They have their own schedules, and it's an age-old industry, right? So they have their own time frames for things, which can be great because you end up with a beautiful product produced by experts. But for entrepreneurs, that's often not the best, way to go because they're in a certain pace and they don't have time to wait 2 years to start leveraging their book for credibility and impact and higher paying clients and speaking gigs, right? They need it out there fast. So that's where a hybrid or self-publishing can be really helpful.
Yeah, a lot to think about. I've really loved this conversation and everything you shared. I could talk about this all day. But before we really wrap up, I'd love it. Is there any final piece of information that you feel that the listeners should really know as to help them with their book writing or their entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, I think the main thing I would say is get help from an expert earlier rather than later. Whether that's in business or whether that's doing something new, like writing a book for the first time, whatever it is, I would say find that expert early on that you know and that you can trust to be your guide. That was one of the mistakes I made early on, is I waited to get that help. And so I would say anyone listening, if you feel like you need the expert or the guide, seek them out right away. Don't wait because they're gonna be the needle mover for you. So
Yeah,
find your expert and get help.
I love that advice, and it's so true. And you know, I think everybody that's been on the podcast has said ask for help and get a coach, even if you think, oh, I'm not in a position yet to have that. It's just the best investment you'll ever make, and the payoff is always huge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Take the leap, find the help, and life will conspire to help you in return for sure.
I love that. Ashley, thank you so much. So for anyone who is listening to this podcast on the road, I'm going to put all of your contact details in the show notes underneath, but how can they get hold of you, or what's the best way to find you online?
Yeah, the best way is just head over to writingcoachla.com, and you'll find a bunch of free resources there. You'll find me there. You can connect with me on social media. I'm super responsive. I answer all my own emails and all my own social media inquiries. So, yeah, reach out anytime. And that's the main hub to find me.
And what was the name of your book again?
My book is called The Writer's Success Code.
Writer's Success Code. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ashley.
Thank you, Melita.